Hi, this tutorial is to help you with your graphic novel assignment for digital storytelling. So I'm assuming that you've chosen a story, maybe based on a newspaper article, that you've got your story working in 12 pictures, you have an idea of the text, and you've got it in a storyboard format, something like this. Now, I recommend that we work with maybe post-it notes to begin with, and then when you've got the images locked in, that you draw them carefully with a black fine liner, which is what I've done here. I've also used a grey marker just to make the storyboard look a bit better, but we're not going to use this grey for our layout. We just want a nice clean black line. So I'm going into Illustrator and I'm going to go New, and I'm going to use the print format, which will give me the usual print format, so A4. I'm going to make sure they're portrait, not landscape, and I'm going to select 2 artboards. That's probably enough for what we need. If you needed 3 or 4 pages, then you could create 3 or 4 artboards. I'm going to call it Ken's Graphic Novel, and I'm going to hit OK. So I have my 2 pages now to do my layout, and I'm going to bring in my storyboard image. So I'll go File, Place, and go to my storyboard image called licestoryboard.jpg, and I'll place it. Now it's quite large because I took it with my Samsung camera phone, and the settings were set quite large. So I'm just going to scale it down, and of course hold the Shift key while I scale it so that it stays in proportion. I'm going to about that size, and using the Command plus and minus keys to zoom in and out as I need to. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to trace the image to get the black lines. At the moment, it's all the grays. It's a JPEG, so it's a raster file. And when I click Image Trace, then Illustrator will make it into a vector line. Now, this is not bad, although I've got some dropouts here. I had some lines here are breaking up, you can see, and I had an eye and a mouth here that seem to have vanished. So I'm going to just tweak it a bit with the Image Trace window, and I'm going to leave it as black and white. I'm not going to choose grayscale or color. I just want the black and white, but I'm going to go for a little more black. So we have threshold here with less and more. So each time I move it, it will preview it, and that's a bit better. The lines are a bit cleaner. I've got one eye now, but I still don't have the other. In other places, the lines are getting better, although I've got some detail is kind of filling in with maybe too much black here. Let's take it up a bit more. Let's go to 162 and see what we get. It's not bad. You know, if I took it much further, if I took it up to 200, then I expect I'm going to start seeing rubbish in here. This is sort of the grays that are now becoming black. So the threshold is too high at 200. Let's take it to around about 160 again. And for this drawing, that seems to be okay. All right, so I still don't have the eyes in here, but you know what? Doesn't matter. If it's important, I can put them in later by hand. Now, before we finish with the Image Trace window, there's one more important thing that we need to do, and that's to open up the advanced options here and go down to Ignore White and tick it. We don't want to trace shapes for the white spaces. We only want to trace shapes for the black. And you'll see it'll go from 15,000 points down to 7,000 points. Now, before I can start working with my image trace, I need to do two steps. One is to take these vectors and expand them into vector points. Now it's vector points just by hitting the expand button. However, I can't just work on any individual part now because they're also grouped. So I need to click on one of my vectors and just ungroup it. Now everything is separate shapes. So at this point I can very easily just go in and select any of the rubbish that's part of the storyboard but not part of the pictures and get rid of it. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm not moving any of the pictures around. I'm just getting rid of bits that I don't want. So I will I'll do all of these and one more. You can see I'm on my paste board here, and so it's transparent grey. So now I have my images. What I don't want to do is to select, say, this image and start positioning it, because I may be leaving half of the image behind. So before I start moving any of my images around and trying to do a layout, I'm going to select frame 1 and group it. Select frame 2 and group it. By the way, the keyboard shortcut is Command G. So once I've grouped my shapes, then I can easily start moving them around and start working on a layout. Now, one of the little housekeeping things I suggest you do at this point, after you've grouped all your frames, is to actually go into the layers and name each group. So instead of there being hundreds of paths here now, it should just be 12 groups. So this one here is frame 2. So I'll call it frame 2, and I'll actually move it just up in under frame 1. This one here will be group 3, frame 3. So I'll move it here and call it frame 3, and so on. You can see whenever you click on one of these groups, that's the one that gets the blue dot. So this will be frame 4, and I'll put it in under frame 4. So when it's done, we'll just see very neatly frames 1 to 12 in our layer panel. So now we can start working with layouts, and I usually like to start big and maybe even just take some of these over onto the pasteboard and just sort of leave them there for the moment, and just bring them back in as I need them. So let's see, here's the first 3 frames. I also, at this point, would probably start thinking about a title. So I don't have to put the title in yet, but let me maybe just make a space for the title and say, okay, we're going to put the title, say, in here, and this frame here is a nice big establishing shot, and then maybe we'll have these 2 frames sort of in here. And you'll see I'm not even terribly worried at the moment about distorting the size and the proportions. Within reason, I might even allow the images to get a bit squashed. I'm just going for a sort of a rough layout. I am watching as I do this how much white space I'm leaving in between these and trying to be a bit consistent with what I'm doing here, because I also have text and I want to see if I'm leaving enough room for the text. So that's what we'll do next, is to put some text, some speech bubbles into these frames. So I have two pieces of text, for one for each of these frames. In this frame, this character here says nice hair, and the girl responds here and says, thanks, it's my new lice treatment. By the way, this story is based on a newspaper article where Dubai Health Authority was warning people against the practice that some salons were doing, which involved the use of lice, hair lice, to stop hair loss. So that's the background of this story, and this is the beginning. So to make a speech bubble, we use the ellipse tool and just make a circle. Now I always like the speech bubble circles to be either horizontal or kind of vertical. What I don't like in speech bubbles is angled speech bubbles like this. So with the speech bubble, typically we would make them to have a speech bubble. We would make them to have a white fill. We would probably give them a black stroke, and probably, depending on this, you know, what scale you're working at, probably 2 or 3 point black stroke. Now let's just go a little bit closer in here and see how we're working. This weight fits reasonably well with the overall drawing style. The text, if we just use the type tool as opposed to all these other choices, I'm talking about the normal type tool, if we try and put the type into the path, we actually lose the path and it becomes complicated. So I prefer not to do that. I prefer to just work to the side and draw out a type box which more or less fits in here. We can size it afterwards. And then with a font that anything except maybe the Arabic. Look, I'm going for Comic Sans. It's a bit done to death, but it'll do for this example. So our girl says, "Wow, nice hair." Now, with the text tool, we can make the text box larger or smaller, and we can then drag the text and place it into our text box. So that's how I would place the text into the circle. The other thing we want to do is the little hook for speaking. So depending on where we want to place it. So let's take both of these pieces, and if we were going to put them, say, here, then we would want a little speech tail that came down to this character, maybe to about there. I'm going to put that point down with control handles, so by dragging. These 2 points here, I'm not going to make control handles, but I am going to make them kind of pointing towards, so the middle of this shape sort of points towards the middle of the speech bubble. And by the way, let's set that as we did the speech bubble with white and a black stroke of 3 points. Now, I'm going to just use the anchor point tool. First of all, let me select with the white arrow. Let me select this point here and use the anchor point tool to break the symmetry. And then back to the white arrow tool, and I'll just use the control handles here to turn that into a sort of a speech bubble that looks as though it's working to this person here. Now with the black arrow, I've got both this shape and the speech bubble, so the tail and the bubble selected, and I need to go to the Pathfinder to use the first Pathfinder option to combine them into one shape. By the way, don't be worried if your text vanishes. It means that the new path is now sitting above the text, so it needs to be dragged down below it. So by doing this method, we've found a nice way to create our speech bubbles. Let's just sort of go out a bit and look at the whole page, and we can see how that works. So one of the things I recommend is, and it's just a housekeeping thing, it's not a right or wrong way of doing it, but what I recommend is that you actually have 3 main layers in your graphic novel. Make one for text, one for the frames, and another layer for fills. And that really should be the order of these these 3 main layers. So if we just grab the text that we've just made and drag it to the text layer, then we've got them in here. We might even select those, and possibly we may even decide to group them. Command G to group them. And what I would suggest is maybe naming that. So this is frame 2, so I'm going to call this like bubble 2. If you have 2 speech bubbles on one frame, then it might be bubble 2-1 and bubble 2-2 or something like that, but we only have 1 there. So this is a way of easily keeping track of what's actually happening with all of these layers. So I've just jumped ahead and made the second speech bubble for this frame 3, and I'm finding it's a bit cramped here. So if I want to maybe shrink, maybe take this frame a little higher, and maybe take this frame a little higher, then but now I feel it's covering too much. So basically what I find is that the framing of my frames, once the speech bubbles are in, may not be the shape of the frame that I had originally. So what I'd like to do now is just to turn off the text for a moment, and so I'm going to use the eraser tool to get rid of this frame. So I'm just going to erase the original frame and make a new frame. And at this stage I'm just going to use the rectangle tool, and you know, any color will do. I'm going to draw in a frame which is more or less the size I really do want, and I'm going to put that rectangle down into my fills section. So let me make it a little lighter maybe. Okay. And we might even give it a stroke, black stroke with maybe 3 points, 4 points, whatever. I might even at some point decide to do something like give it a slightly rounded corner, and I can do that very easily also here. So now if I position this, and I may want to even erase a little bit of the line at the bottom to make that sit nicer in the frame. But now if I put my text back on, I can start to see how this text might fit with this new frame. So I've now got the flexibility to make that frame any size I want. So that's how I would work, probably getting rid of some of the original frames and starting to use them any way that I want. So I think you get the idea. I could then work ahead, playing with different layout ideas, trimming the old frames as I need, putting in the speech bubbles where they're required. Once you've got all of that done, it's actually very easy to do alternative layers. So I would put all the speech bubbles, all of the fills in here, and then I might just make a new layer and call this layout 1, and just drop everything into layout 1, and then it's very easy to just drag layout 1 to the page here and make this layout 2. If I was going to do that, I would probably lock layout 1 and turn it off, so I know I'm only working in layout 2, and then I'd start playing with different ideas. How else could this work? So there's wonderful opportunities here to just experiment with the layouts very easily, just using the frames, the text, and the fills layers, and experimenting with different layouts. So the last thing I'd like to mention is the coloring. So once you have your drawing, you're happy with it. If you needed to redo a drawing that you think would be better artwork or a better style than you did in your storyboard, then do another drawing, bring it in, and place it into the frame. But let's say I'm happy with this, all my drawings, and it's time to start coloring. If you wish, you don't have to color, and it's your choice what colors you use. For me, I've decided I want to put some color in, so I'm going to my swatches down to the library, and we have a set of skin tone swatches here. I quite like the look of this set here, so I'm just going to drag that set into my swatches, and there they are. I also quite like some of these soft ones. Now there's just lots of different colors, so I just picked up the soft tones from here, and I thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to use these for the hair color. Yep, it's a little crazy, but that's what I'm going to do. So let's see, I'm going to just pick up now. I recommend the blob brush is the one that is good for this kind of painting. So with the blob brush, I'm going to pick this color here and just do this. And it doesn't create a shape. It creates one shape, one outer shape, rather than creating a shape for every part of the stroke that I did. So there's my blob. I might even use a bit of a shadow under here. Oh wait, the shadow. Notice it's the stroke that we're defining here with the blob brush. So maybe even a little bit of and I may need to get a smaller brush to make this really nice, but there we go, it's okay. Same with the hair color. Let's put some blue in. Ooh. Let's put some blue in, and now I'm starting to think that looks fantastic. By the way, did I check that I'm actually doing all of this within the fills so that it sits under the frame, so that I don't have to worry about going on top of any of my black lines. Okay, so you get the idea. We might want some white highlights here, so let's grab a white and a little white back into the eyes, and maybe even a little white sort of highlights somewhere in here. So you get the idea of how coloring can work using this method. So that's really all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. Most of this, I guess, you've experimented with in class already, and this video is really just to kind of maybe remind you of some steps that you forgot. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing your assignment.